Peace, my people. You're tuning into I Must Be Bugging, where Black, gifted, and otherwise neurodivergent folks celebrate our special flavors. If you've ever questioned your perspective in a world built for the masses, welcome home. I'm your host, Sheldon Gay, and I appreciate you joining me on this journey as a late-identified Black, gifted man. Together, we'll rewrite the script on neurodiversity by celebrating our differences, challenging the status quo, and breaking free from old narratives that label us as deficient. In each episode, we'll explore the stories, experiences, and of course the curiosities of Black gifted adults and other neurodivergent people who are underrepresented or unidentified in a world where normal can also mean harmful. So continue with me on this journey of self-discovery, empowerment, and acceptance. I Must Be Bugging is creating safe spaces, sparking conversations, and making sure our voices are heard. Welcome to the next episode of I Must Be Bugging. Thank you so much, as always, for joining us today. We have yet another great friend here with us on the podcast. My name is Sheldon Gay, your host. My pronouns are he, him. And, we're going to jump into this in a few. For those who, to kind of set the stage, if this is your first time listening to the podcast, I am officially a 42-year-old Black man with curly hair, kind of faded on the sides. And I'm currently wearing, a nice white t-shirt, and I've got a little tuft of hair for like a little goatee. And so thank you again for joining us. I'm going to introduce our guest, like I said, who I'm very excited to chat with. He and I have talked before and loved the conversation, so I think you all will really enjoy this. So today we have with us Shea Belsky, who is an autistic self-advocate and change maker. He is the Chief Technology Officer of Mentra, which is a hiring platform for neurodivergent job seekers to seek gainful employment from neuro-inclusive organizations. Pretty cool to hear that, right? Shea brings several unique perspectives to supporting neurodivergent colleagues. He has been the manager of neurodivergent and neurotypical employees, has reported to neurodivergent and neurotypical managers, and has advocated for the needs and well-being of neurodivergent and neurotypical peers. He is also a champion for accessibility in the workplace, for software, and in physical spaces. Shea is excited to share these experiences with others in order to create a more neuro-inclusive workplace for everyone. So thank you, Shea, for being here. Everybody, kind of if you're in the car or wherever you are, kind of give a little applause for Shea. Shea, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Sheldon. I'm really hyped to be here to talk about neurodiversity, about my experiences as an autistic person, and about how anybody, wherever you are neurodivergent, if you know somebody who is, if you work with somebody who is, how you can be a supportive ally, friend, companion, boss, whoever you are. To give a little background on myself, I am Shea Belsky. I am a white Caucasian male with curly brown hair. I'm sitting in front of like a dark gray background in a phone booth. I'm wearing a blue and silver and yellow striped shirt, and I'm wearing black headphones on right now as well.
Yes.
And that is a little bit about me. I'm an autistic self-advocate as well. I've been diagnosed with autism since I was pretty young, and I recognize as well that getting a diagnosis wherever you are in life can be challenging. And I consider myself pretty privileged to have had a diagnosis as early as I did. And the things that I'm doing with Mentra are kind of a byproduct of the privilege that I had. And I just try to take advantage of it and share what I had with other people to whom getting a diagnosis might be a cost barrier, might be socially difficult if people in their surroundings don't support them in getting a diagnosis, or there are other barriers to finding the right medical care.
Yeah, this is great, because this is really where I wanted to start, and thank you for sharing that and speaking to that, because increasingly, as I do this work, and I'm sure, obviously, right, as you do this work, you see, I was on a call, I see the challenges around, people being late diagnosed. And so I was on a call, I don't know what that was, what's today. Well, anyway, the other day I was on a call, there was a woman who was 70 plus, who was just figuring out that she had ADHD. I cannot imagine going 70 years and finding that out. That's a whole
It's life
that
changing
is
for
a whole
people. Wherever you're 70 years old, wherever you're 7 years old. I think what's happening now in society and life is that the barrier to entry, predominantly the social barrier to entry, is being reduced, where there's
Mhm,
less stigma, less admonishment, less problems of people coming out and saying, "Hi world, I have ADHD, or I have dyslexia, I have autism," whatever it is. There's far there's far fewer people who are going to give you a hard time over those things.
mhm,
Ultimately, I've found that it's not that these things are growing or spreading like COVID might be, for instance. The incidence
mhm,
rate of
mhm,
it is not getting higher. It's that more people are willing to seek out the diagnosis, and also the science is getting better. The science
mhm,
around what does EDHD look like in a 70-year-old person? What does
mhm,
autism
mhm,
look like in someone like a person of color? What
mhm,
does ADHD look like for women? So on and so forth. The
mhm, mhm.
science is also getting better, and people are getting more educated around how does it come off, how does it come across in other people.
Yeah, that's you hit the nail on the head. I mean, I think, one of the biggest challenges before was that all the things you just mentioned and, more, but I do think that, conversations like this, the work that you're doing is really helping to create safer spaces for folks, to, um, you know, not only live a truth that maybe they're aware of, but also investigate. Because I know, again, for me, it was about investigation, like me understanding, excuse me, my, gifted is my neurodivergence was about me saying, wait a second, let me, like, first I was just digging into who I was and being open to what I found and, kind of going from there. Um, Sometimes people are kind of forced to. I know there are folks who I've talked to who have had like mental breakdowns, and that's kind of how they came to their late diagnosis or late identification. Um, and so again, the more safe spaces that people have to be able to do that, and the lowering of the barriers, whether they be financial or social, um, that stuff is really important.
Something that
So
happens very often as well is that somebody will become friends of someone who's neurodivergent,
yeah,
and they're like,
hmm
"Oh wow, we're so similar. We have so many of the same
right,
traits." And like, there's
right,
like a Instagram reel which I love where it's like, "Wow, we're so similar in so many ways," and it's like the meme where it's like, "I don't want to spoil it
right,
for
right,
you," and then
right,
you're turns out you have ADHD or whatever it is. I
yeah,
think something that I find to be very, very true about neurodivergent people is that we have this often unintentional habit of like gravitating towards each other. I'm not sure if
hmm
it's like magnetism or a radar or something, but I really feel that neurodivergent people have a very, it can be intentional, obviously,
hmm
but I
hmm
found more often than it unintentionally just so happens that people who are neurodivergent kind of gravitate towards each other through circumstance or shared interests or
hmm hmm
personality or kindness and stuff like that.
yeah, no, I'm just going to keep the flow going, but like you actually just reminded me, there was a video I was watching, somebody posted on Facebook, this, like, I guess it was a TikTok or whatever. Base bottom line being, it was a short video, and it was this person talking about um, finding community, essentially, right? And
Yep.
one of the biggest things that I know that stuck out to me in the video, and that stuck out for me personally, around finding more community with neurodivergent folks, is that there is there is this barrier to understanding that is significantly lower, because there, it's not just, oh, you like ice cream too, sure, right? But then there's this thing of when you eat ice cream and the flavors are more intense or the texture is more intense, that's a whole nother layer to the experience that a lot of people can't. It's not even a, you know, it's much harder for them to even fathom, if that makes sense. And so when you find somebody else who, um, experiences those things where you don't even have to explain, it just makes it so much easier to relate, because essentially that's what, community and friendship is really about, right? It's that ability to share our um, life experiences in a way that you can feel understood. Like that's a key part of that entire, um, experience or whatever. So
A
I think
huge
that's a. Go ahead.
a huge part of that is the idea of like empathy and saying,
Mm-hmm,
I've been where you've been, and
mm-hmm,
that creates so much more understanding and just communication and awareness. Like for the past couple years, I have done Big Brothers Big Sisters with a quote little brother in the Boston area,
mm-hmm,
and our experience as our relationship is so much stronger because he'll come to me and he'll say, "Oh, I just went through this really tough thing or this challenge," and I'm like, "I've been exactly where you've been. Here's how I
mm-hmm,
would handle it." And we're both neurodivergent, and
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
just being able to have that shared understanding from somebody who's been through it, who's been exactly where you've been, is huge for people. A lot of
mm-hmm,
neurodivergent individuals may only have clinical or medical support in their lives through like
mm-hmm,
therapists or psychiatrists or
mm-hmm,
whatnot.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
They may
mm-hmm.
not have that like other autistic person in their life to whom they can lean on and just ask, am I going crazy here? And that person
Right,
can say, no, you're not going crazy. I've been through that. Here's how I would do it. Because to
right.
some people, just hearing the validation and being like, wow, I'm not going crazy can
Mm-hmm.
be huge. And for
Yeah.
other people, it can make or break their entire lives.
No, you're absolutely right. For me, one of the most powerful things, particularly early on, was the mirroring. Like I remember I sought out a specific gifted coach. Um, and it was amazing from day one. Shout out to Booney. I'm gonna say your name, Booney. Shout out to Booney. But you know, just her being her on that first call, like, and just knowing the what I call the brain sparks or the brain sparkles, like just seeing that in her and knowing what that experience is like, and just having that mirrored in a way that even folks who can, empathize to a certain level, right? Like that is good, but when you can just kind of literally kind of see yourself in somebody else, like it's so powerful. And it's funny, like I said, when you're talking about that experience of like wondering, is something, up with you? Like, obviously, right? That's the title of the podcast is I Must Be Bugging, because that's that very common experience for us is, you know, maybe, like I said, maybe it is me that's, uh, just seeing the world in a completely different way. But when you find others um, who make you feel less alien, it can literally change your life. So
It's
so
night
yeah,
and day.
yeah, no, absolutely. And so let's kind of go back a little bit and talk a little bit about um, the work that you do, because I want to talk about that. It's really, really important. I know I wish that I had something like this when I was still like pursuing, um, corporate opportunities and stuff like that. But tell us a little bit about, about your work. And I mean, I guess we've already answered this question, is whether or not you identify as neurodivergent. But if you can tell me a little bit about, your relationship with the word, let me say it that way.
Yeah, I am autistic. I
Mm-hmm.
have a diagnosis on paper. I was diagnosed at a very young age. And I mentioned before, I recognize that for a lot of people, those things can seem very rare. And don't get me wrong, I'm very aware of the fact that I had a diagnosis. I had a diagnosis when I was young, and I had access to support services that I needed in school to lead a successful life. And it doesn't mean it wasn't hard, but I had a lot of support services. I had an IEP. I had a one-on-one in school. I had a speech therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy. I basically had it all when I was in school. And I definitely needed all those things.
Mm-hmm.
And I also recognize that for a lot of people, like, they could have benefited from those things too. And it's a matter of like, well, like, why did I get them and someone else not get them? There's thousands of answers to that question, and we
Mm-hmm.
can sit here all day talking about them. But what's important about my neurodiversity now is that I have the ability to communicate, talk about it, and to advocate for people who have a harder time finding their own voice, who really benefit from somebody like me talking about neurodiversity, talking about autism. And I try
Mm-hmm.
to make a point of not saying I speak for every single autistic person, because as
Mm-hmm.
one of the most popular quotes out there is, if you met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. So
Mm-hmm.
I'll be the
Mm-hmm.
first to say it. I am one person with autism, and my experiences of it vary greatly from other people. And I do not want to get up here and say that I speak for every single person. But
Mm-hmm.
I can speak to my experiences. I can speak to experiences that are commonly shared by many people without coming down and saying that this is everybody who's ever autistic ever. Because I think
Mm-hmm.
that that's not constructive at all.
Yeah. Actually, before we kind of circle back, actually, I'd love to tap into that because I think that, um, I'm really curious about, I mean, I guess for anybody, right, like who's neurodivergent, but like, what does being autistic, what does that mean to you? How do you experience that? Tell us a little bit about what that means for you.
I would say that my autism affects me, I would say, on a more sensory level, and social to a
Mm,
lesser extent. Like,
mm,
take me to a very loud bar, take me to a massive concert, take me to an area with very strong smells or touch,
mm, mhm,
and I can sort of start to struggle there. And
mhm,
in
mhm,
the workplace as well, I struggle sometimes with brighter lights, with open desk environments. It depends a little bit on the environment, but I would
mhm,
say
mhm,
what I'm dealing with right now, dealing with is the wrong word. What I work through as a function of my autism and how it affects me is like in very subtle social situations that I kind of just have to figure it as I go.
mhm,
I just got married back in October, and that was a very crazy and amazing and fun experience for me, especially as being an autistic person, kind
mhm.
of finding my life partner, my
Right.
person with whom I trust the most, I can confide in the most, and have the most amount of fun with.
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
And I never thought that I would ever marry someone, let alone like being in a relationship with someone, because I've
Right.
always struggled with connecting with people, whether
Mhm,
as friends or romantic partners or who knows what.
mhm,
And
mhm, mhm,
finding my partner when I did, right before the pandemic, no less, really turned my life in a completely different direction that I didn't expect. And now we're married. Now we both own a house, and
mhm.
it's just such a wild ride since I've met them, and it's been life changing and incredible in every way.
So I believe I've told you before, but if not, congratulations on that again. That's something to celebrate.
Thank you.
Particularly, it sounds like you all, um, you understand this dynamic of your relationship that is, or for both of you, right? Like understanding that these dynamics are at play, and not to kind of sidetrack. But I know that I'm grateful that you all, um, or that you have that awareness as you enter into this relationship, because I have a very strong belief that many relationships, particularly around communication, break down because of these misunderstandings about each other's experiences. And a lot of that goes to some of these folks, if not both of the folks, or if you're poly, right, multiple of these folks, right,
Hmm.
um, being neurodivergent. And the less that you kind of understand about your experience and how that shows up and causes you to show up, right, the less the more challenges that you'll have around navigating that, because every relationship has its opportunities for miscommunication. But like what I was saying earlier, it's like there's a difference between, you know, do you want ice cream today or not want ice cream today? And you know, when we go to this ice cream parlor and there's a bunch of people around, or there's like a lot of strong smells around, is that the reason why you don't like going to get ice cream? Because that's a totally different conversation, right?
Yep.
So anyway, I've digressed enough, but I'm happy for you. And I just wanted to kind of throw that little nugget in there. Um,
It's so interesting being in a relationship with somebody. It's just in general, from one neurodivergent person to anyone, whether they're neurotypical or neurodivergent. In
mhm,
my particular scenario, I'm very fortunate and lucky, and just so floored by my partner's kindness, their willingness to listen, to communicate, and being receptive to me when I'm not at my best, and also
mhm,
helping me help them as well. I think
mhm,
what makes relationships tough for someone who's neurodivergent, who's autistic specifically, is not always knowing how to reciprocate. Like, what's your love language?
mm,
When
mhm,
my
mhm,
partner and I were first dating, when my wife and I were first dating, we would talk a lot about what's your love language? What's your way of communicating to somebody that you care about them, that you love you?
mhm,
And in my situation, my way of showing I love you to my wife was that they were taking a really important exam for their career, for their profession.
mhm,
And rather than send them something, rather than like call them or text them afterwards, immediately, if I didn't know when they'd be done, it's like a 5 or 6 hour test. I arranged for like a lunch delivery to be dropped off at their house. I texted them, I'm like, I know you can't read this right now, but when you're done, um, your parents put lunch in the fridge for you. I ordered it from like your favorite restaurant, whatever it was. And that's
mhm,
kind of my way of communicating to her that I love you, even if I can't
mhm,
talk to you at this moment in time.
mhm,
And then
mhm,
like kind of refining your love language, like acts of service or words of affirmation. Like what's the way that you want to give it? What's the way that you want to receive it? And I feel like for neurodivergent people, it's so unique.
mhm,
I see this all the time on Reddit too. It's like the love language is like, I saw this funny meme or this funny article or this picture and I thought you might like it too.
mhm,
I
mhm,
see that.
mhm,
I do that so often. I'll send her a meme about something. Sometimes she'll laugh, sometimes she won't, but it's just kind of my way of communicating with her when sometimes the words aren't enough. Because I feel like as an autistic person, I have a lot of thoughts and words in my brain that
mhm,
I can't articulate the way I want to. And I
mhm,
kind of
mhm.
let memes and pictures do the talking for me.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Because again, I think it just speaks to this awareness. There are times when, particularly, we're socialized to view relationships in a certain way and have certain expectations for relationships. And, you know, um, those nuances, right? Like, yeah, I'm not talking necessarily about you or whatever. I don't know what happened to your relationship. I'm just saying, like, potentially, what could have happened is someone sending memes instead of, um, whatever, describing all the words that were in their mind, right, could come off in a different way, right? It could be misunderstood in a different way. But if you're able to talk through that and be aware of it, this is why, like I said, for me, the awareness is so important, because it's like, if I can say, here, I'm sending, these memes because, if something comes up, like, why do you keep sending me these memes? It's like, instead of being like, in your mind, why don't you like me sending memes? Like, and then you folks get like caught up in this conversation about not the actual issue. If somebody could say, look, I understand it may seem different, but it's easier for me to communicate in this way because of, blah, 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 right? Or this just feels like it captures what I'm trying to say at a different level, or, whatever that thing is for you that helps you communicate what's going on. And when you have a receptive partner, that just makes things so much better because every one of us is literally living a unique experience, and communication is the dance of trying to take something that's in your mind and translate it to someone else's. And it's not a perfect thing. Like, we can literally see the exact same words on a paper and see, whatever, we can interpret things differently. And so, um, again, this is just, like I said, just so interesting. And so, like I said, this is why I'm so grateful for you that it sounds like I said, you all have found, um, a way to make the most of that, if that makes sense. So,
Sometimes my partner and I will talk for minutes or hours on end and not even fully understand what we're talking about. So we take a couple steps back and be like, what do you really mean here? Because sometimes we'll be talking about the same topic with completely different words, and we'll both get upset with each other, or we won't fully understand. And then we'll be like, oh, did you mean this? And then it completely de-escalates. And I've had to do a much more conscious, insistent job of clarifying, okay, this is what you mean when you say this. That way we're on the same page. I'm a big over communicator because of that. I'll just say, just so I know what you mean, this is what you're trying to say to me. Is that correct? And sometimes they get mad at me, but I'm like, I'd rather make it be patently super duper turbo clear what you mean here,
right,
rather
right,
than me assuming I know what you mean and then I don't. And I
yep,
even do this at my work. It's like I'll write out a ticket or something in Slack or whatever it is, and I'll just make it abundantly clear. Is this what you mean? Is this what is meant here? And I empower my teammates, my direct reports to do that too. I'll say to them, if you don't know what I mean here, call me out on it. Because if you don't know what's going on here, chances are someone else also is running into the same problem too.
yeah, yeah. No, that's really, really important. And so, kind of going back to, I want to make sure we talk about the actual. Well, this is super. I could go on for days about this, and maybe you know, uh, we'll join back up at a later time, like with a group of folks, and like really dig into this topic. But I want to make sure that we do talk about what you're doing at Mentra. Can you tell me a little bit about what you do there, how you kind of got involved with the company?
Absolutely. With Mentra, we're building a hiring platform for job seekers who are neurodivergent. And
Hmm.
what we are trying to do with our workforce is look at all of the amazing, incredibly talented people who are out there who have a difficult time advocating for themselves to their mentors, to their managers, to their advisors, to their teammates about the neurodiversity for one reason or another. And we take what we know about neurodivergent job seekers, and we take what companies are asking us for about how they could do a better job hiring and combine it in one place. A
Hmm.
lot of other platforms out there, they focus only on one or the other. They focus on either the job seeker or the employer, but not typically both. Whereas
Hmm.
Mentra emphasizes the relationship between both, because ultimately both people have to come to the table to say the employer wants to hire this person for the job, and the job seeker wants to work at this company.
Hmm.
So for our job seekers, we ask them to advocate for themselves, but we don't just ask them that, we help them do that.
Hmm.
We
Hmm.
ask kind of the generic, regular questions that happen on a job application site, but then we also ask them, tell us about any accommodations you might need. Help us
Hmm.
understand your neurodiversity. What are your
Hmm.
superpowers? What are your areas where you need additional support or help? Tell us about
Hmm.
how your neurodiversity adds to the workplace. We enable our job seekers to advocate for themselves in a way that they may not have had a chance to do before, because they may not have known what to say or how to say it. We kind of give them the voice or the vehicle to talk about it.
Yeah.
And for our employers, we also ask them, well, why should a job seeker want to work for you? What does
Hmm.
your company provide that incentivizes or inspires a neurodivergent job seeker to want to work in your organization? Because
Hmm.
otherwise, they'll just go somewhere else. A big
Right.
part about this effort to get people into the workforce is not just hiring them, but also retaining them. Sure, like you can
Hmm.
hire a bunch of people and that's great, but if
Absolutely.
they don't like the company, they're gonna just move on to the next thing, and that's just a lot of waste of everyone's time and money. So you
Yeah.
gotta wanna advocate for yourself as an organization to say, why should an autistic, ADHD, dyslexic, whoever person want to work for your company and then stay there? Because
Yeah.
otherwise, you have no real business just focusing on hiring when you have a retention problem too.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's really important across. I mean, I guess the retention piece is like a super big thing, particularly for those, what I'll just call melanated and marginalized communities. I know, being in corporate, one of the biggest things, that's related to, my lived experiences around Black people getting hired. So I've been at companies where there's only been a couple of us, then they hire a bunch of people, and then you essentially see this like very interesting cycle of people coming in, but those like, whatever, 6 months, a year later, those people are leaving and they're replacing them. And it's like, wait a second, we're hiring, but we're not retaining. That means that there's something here that doesn't doesn't match, right? Like you got us in the door, but there are some tensions here that we need to kind of investigate around why somebody wouldn't want to stay um, longer. Um, so going back to or kind of continuing on what you were saying, like, what do you think is, or what are some of the most common things that neurodivergent people wish that they could get out of a hiring experience?
Just the honesty and openness or just willingness to listen by recruiters and interviewers.
Hmm.
Something that I've come across a lot is that managers and bosses are getting better training, getting better support for neurodivergent people, but the interviewers, the recruiters, the people who are kind of on the front line, the first people to talk to job applicants, are
Hmm.
not receiving the same amount of training. And as a
Mm.
result, when recruiters and interviewers don't have what they need to have a meaningful conversation with a neurodivergent individual, that kind of sours everyone's perspective.
Hmm.
On the
Hmm.
in the worst case scenario, on the off chance that something really bad and negative gets said, then
Hmm.
that will kind of color that job seeker's entire experience, and they may not want to work at a company, even if the manager they've been working with is really good about neurodiversity. If the recruiter or interviewer isn't supportive or doesn't know what to do or doesn't give them what they need,
Hmm.
then that's kind of it at that point. You can't, it's hard to walk that back.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I believe that ultimately, when it comes to just looking at the interview, looking at just the job seeking process, neurodivergent job seekers just want to be listened to be
Hmm.
heard, to be understood, and to be helped given the structure that they need to be as competitive as other people in the same process. It doesn't mean they have to be given like a cheat code or an advantage or like anything that would create disparity between two applicants, but they want to be able to be evaluated on the same playing field as their other people. And
Hmm.
maybe they can't do that on their own. Maybe they need some support from the employer, from the interviewer to give them extra time to answer questions. Maybe if it's an in person interview, maybe they need to be in a quiet space.
Hmm.
Maybe they need
Hmm.
the questions in advance. Maybe they need their video off. Maybe
Hmm.
I could keep going on. But if those are the things that would enable a hiring manager to make an informed, objective decision about someone's im- uh, possibility to work at a company, then companies should want to provide these accommodations and create an equitable playing field because that's what it is. You're
Hmm.
not you're not giving someone a cheat code.
Right.
You're changing the game a little bit so that you, as a hiring manager, can make as same as equitable decision as possible across all your applicants.
Hmm. Hmm. So thanks. That's, yeah, I agree that. And just to confirm and clarify, are you helping applicants actually, I guess when they're going into the hiring process, they're being very clear that they're neurodivergent. Um, are they specifically mentioning any diagnosis, or is it just kind of like, I'm coming to the table as a neurodivergent person, and here are, you know, some questions that I have, or here are some accommodations that I want to kind of, feel out? Like, tell me a little bit about how that works.
When a job seeker signs up for Mentra, they check a box. So before they even officially sign up, they affirm that they are neurodivergent in some way, shape, or form. Later on in the process, we ask them for what specifically about them makes them neurodivergent, and this stuff is not like medically binding. To be honest with you, like we don't like take that and then advertise it everywhere else. More for us to understand how we can help you as a job seeker. And employers also never see exactly what your diagnosis is.
Gotcha.
So just because it's applied to us, we'll never show that to anyone else.
Yeah.
And as a result of that it makes it a little bit easier for us in terms of data collection, because we're not asking you to upload proof of diagnosis. We don't ask you if you have a diagnosis, at least not at this time. You can be self-diagnosed. You can have a hunch. You can have a couple of things. You can have one thing. We just ask for a little bit of information. That way we can meaningfully help you and provide you with the right support that you need, because what someone who's autistic might need might be different from someone who has ADHD, from dyslexia, from epilepsy, from someone who's bipolar, so on.
Yeah, no, thank you for clarifying that. And I think that makes sense. And you also touched on what is a seemingly hot button topic in the neurodivergent world, which is self identification. There are so many people who, excuse me, because of the things we talked about at the beginning, right? The barriers to diagnosis. I've heard people who were like, yeah, I have to wait 6 months to get, like, I took the test, or I did, I went and talked with whomever, and they're going to give me my results in 6 months. And it's like, what?
It's
Like,
ridiculous.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And then there are things where it's like, it's going to cost somebody several $1,000s, and you don't even know on the other end if that's going to be you don't even know. You might test for, I don't know, I'm just going to pick something, right? Like, you might test for ADHD, and on the other end it's like, oh, you're not, you don't have ADHD, but then you're like, well, I know something's up, right? Now I didn't spend thousands of dollars that I didn't really have, right? Like, what? So
It's
again,
ridiculous.
yeah, absolutely. So knowing that you all are, right, you're not like sending people some like 5 doctors to to confirm and all this other fun stuff,
No,
right? Like
like,
that.
we're not in the business of diagnosing people. One, because that just is insane and crazy. And two, because ultimately there's so much of an issue around getting a diagnosis in the first place. We're not here to tell somebody if they are or are not neurodivergent. We are fully understanding of people who are self-diagnosed because of all the barriers that you mentioned and others. Ultimately, we're not going to distinguish that. And what we believe is most important is getting you to figure out, how do you advocate for yourself? What's your voice? What are the things that you struggle with, and helping you lock in that opportunity, that a job role is going to be really helpful and successful for you.
Yeah. So we talked a little bit about from the, potential employees perspective, but from the potential employer's perspective, what are some of the things that they typically misunderstand about neurodivergent needs or our experiences?
The biggest thing that I find myself struggling with all the time is that when I'm talking with somebody and I talk about my being autistic, and they're like, "You don't look autistic," and I'm like, "Well,
Oh, brother.
what does being autistic
Yeah.
look like?" Because people think
Right.
I'm not like Sheldon from Big Bang Theory or Rain Man or
Right.
whoever else it
Right.
is that they saw on TV or in a movie or in a book. Everybody has
Mm-hmm.
a very clear idea what autism means from TV. But
Mm-hmm.
on a
Mm-hmm.
more sincere note, if I do say I'm autistic, people will kind of picture in their heads whoever the next closest person they know who has autism is. And that can be
Mm-hmm.
somebody who is either a lot higher or a lot lower support needs from me. They may not describe me at all for one reason or another. And yet that's going to be a definition that they associate with me, unless I tell them up front, actually, I'm autistic, and what that means is A, B, C, D, E.
Mm-hmm.
And they can be like, "Oh, that doesn't describe the person that I know at all." And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
"Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
well, if you've met one person with autism, you've met one
Right.
person. We're very
Right.
different people." And
Right.
as a result, that I think really messes with people's heads when they don't anticipate that two people with autism can be fundamentally different people.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, or I know that, this is one of the things that, um, particularly autistic folks speak about, the spectrum not being this linear thing, but this, you know, multidimensional, this, it does, again, it's definitely not
It's a color
linear,
wheel.
right? Right. There's a lot, right. There's a lot that can kind of go into it. And so at that point you realize, oh, wait, like there could be, you can have this little piece over here, and this piece over here, and none of the other stuff. You know what I mean? Like these experiences can be so dynamic. And I have said before that I think generally speaking, you know, if we ever get to the point where we can kind of like fully understand all this stuff, in my mind, the way that I visualize it is that there are these dials that, and obviously let's just say there were 10, but obviously there'd probably be a lot more, but let's just say there were 10 dials. And for me, it's about how your combination, like how you've turned up one dial versus another dial, right? Because, you know, again, I am 100% open to discovering that um, I am, I have more neurodivergent, flavors within me. But I can say that for sensory things, I don't identify as autistic. I've done tests that have, um, you know, or no, online tests or whatever, right? That's like, oh, you know, nowhere near close to being what would be diagnosable, I guess is the best way of saying it. But I know that there are some shared experiences around that, around sensory stuff, around, a number of different things. And so, um, for me, I think that when we kind of pull back, what we'll start to see is there's just these sort of elements that it's just about how, you know, much your dial's turned up that determines, like I said, how your spice package, whatever, ends up tasting. Um, and so that's, again, it goes back to just talking about like no one. It's not like you slap a label on it and it's everybody's exactly the same. It's like, no, like this package is different than this package over here. And so you've got to be very curious. It behooves you to be very curious about the package rather than just kind of latching onto the label and making assumptions from there.
It gets interesting because I think when it comes to self-diagnosis, because there's such a high barrier to entry around, well, what do I really have? As you said, I don't have
Hmm.
ADHD. Well, what do I have? Well, you can pull out your wallet, spend a couple $1,000s, figure it out, or
Sure.
you can do the homework online and make your best guess and go from there.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
I think where it bothers me is people who completely invalidate or give people a hard time over the self-diagnosis experiences. And
Hmm.
this is coming from me, who has an official diagnosis, but I
Hmm.
fully understand that I know a couple of people in my life who could pay for a diagnosis, who have the access to the insurance and the doctors, but people in their lives and their family members or their friends would kind of exclude them or treat them differently because of that. And for
Hmm.
those
Hmm.
reasons, they choose to keep it a secret. And also, the
Yeah.
reverse is true, where a parent may have a diagnosis for their kids and may
Hmm.
choose to keep that a secret from
Yeah.
their kids because they feel ashamed or afraid of what it means for them.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
I've heard so many people confronting their parents and being like, "Oh, I got a diagnosis for autism tonight," and they're like, "Oh, we've known that for 10 years. We just never told you
Yeah.
because one thing or another."
Yeah.
And it's so it grinds my gears to have to listen to that happen over and over and over.
Yeah. That's a that is definitely, again, one of the saddest things for me. And I know that, ultimately all this stuff is really driven by the various structures, um, that kind of keep us bound. But it's, when you kind of get down to the micro level of, like you said, my individual experience with my parent, and like, why would you, I've got a friend who, I mean, I know multiple people, but I'm just thinking right now about a particular friend who was telling me how they, you know, found out that they had ADHD, they go to their parents and their parents are like, oh yeah. And it's like, wait, what do you mean? Like, you've seen me all these years, like struggling and wondering what the heck is going on with me, and like, why can't I do this, or why is this different for me, and didn't say anything. And you know, it's a that's one of the challenges too about, even if you are officially I'm gonna say properly officially diagnosed, um or self-diagnosed or identified, like regardless, at that point at which you kind of quote unquote get an answer, you have to be aware that there are going to be um some questions and some realizations that come with it. And that's one of the reasons why I'm always mindful of, as well, of you know um not sharing, like if you can kind of see it in people, like you got the kind of ND radar or whatever, right?
Yep.
And you can kind of see that. I'm very mindful of not kind of revealing something to somebody, at least until, well, certainly unless they ask, excuse me, but as well until it seems like maybe they're ready, because it can be, I know for me, it was, and to some extent still is, a very like earth shattering revelation, because you start to look at all the different things in your life that, like, I know I had a lot of stuff from my childhood, memories that I had, repressed or just forgotten about, that all of a sudden they came back to the surface, and I had to like go through those again, and with a different lens, and you know all those different things. And so just being mindful of that to me is also a key element.
I think it's interesting to hear your perspective about not sharing your neurodiversity super openly with people until you get into it with them. Whereas I feel very fortunate to have the confidence to talk about it as openly as I do.
Mhm,
And it's on my LinkedIn, it's on like my social media. Like,
mhm,
I don't try
mhm,
to
mhm,
hide it. I don't try to shy away from it. I'm kind of in the opposite direction where I'm like, yeah, like, come at me, come talk to me about it. Largely
yeah,
because, at least in my social circle and my life, among my family and friends, people don't really have anybody else who they can talk about it with as openly as they would if I talk about it with me. And like,
mhm,
I've had random people who I don't talk with like at all approach me
mhm,
on like text me or chat me on like social media and ask me, hey, like such and such who I know is autistic and I want to know how to help them. And I think
mhm,
in my case, being as open as I am about it helps reduce the barrier for people to want to talk about it. And
mhm,
I think that experience also applies to neurodivergent people, where they want to feel like someone else can be a good listener, where someone
mhm,
can understand, oh, this is who I am, this is me as a person. I just want to have a conversation with somebody else. And
yeah,
I've been a part of a couple of different mentorship organizations that focus on neurodiversity and mentorship and that camaraderie and
mhm,
helping two people find either a common ground or just like a good listening technique. Like,
mhm,
one of them comes to mind as more targeted at younger kids. They are called superpowers mentors, and they
mhm,
focus on connecting school age kids, like folks at elementary school, middle school, high school, and like college ish, with mentors who are neurodivergent to help give them kind of a big brothers, big sisters sort of deal,
mhm,
and help them understand, yeah, I've been where you've been through and that sucks. Or
mhm,
just having someone to share your experiences with, or just having somebody who won't judge you, somebody who will
mhm,
listen and not make assumptions and just kind of be present. And for
yeah,
like for middle school kids who are going through puberty, who don't know what the heck is happening in their own lives with their own body, having someone else to talk through that with can be massive for their mental health, for who they
absolutely.
are, and for their development.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. And this is what you're talking about is exactly why I continued with this podcast. Like, the funny thing about the podcast is that it was potentially just going to be like, whatever, a couple of episodes, like me just sharing a couple of different things that I wanted to kind of get off my chest about my, self-identification. But exactly what you're mentioning is exactly, why I continued, and why, I have big vision for what to do going forward because of how my sharing my experience has opened the doors for a lot of people to reach out and all this different kind of stuff. One of the things I'm just very mindful of is not going to somebody and saying, you know, you got ADHD, right? Or, you know, you're autistic, right? Or, you know, that, you know, that part
Yep.
is what I'm very mindful of. And I know that is something that people don't, they're not necessarily as careful about, but it's, to me, it's really important. And this kind of leads me as well. And we're kind of talking in this space about this like next question that I have, which is, you know, I think one of the challenges around it is that people, people want to, there's benefits in knowing that you, for example, have ADHD, but people don't want that to be like, they don't want to be the ADHD person, right? And so what my question to you is how do you think we can balance making neurodivergence a part of our identity, but also not defining us, right, in the workplace or in life in general, if that makes sense?
It's a challenging question because when we talk about equity for people in the workplace or
Mm-hmm.
neurodivergent, there's a huge emphasis on reducing barriers and creating accommodations and an inclusive space. But then
Mm-hmm.
you also have to balance not alienating and ostracizing people
Mm-hmm.
because of the
Mm-hmm.
neurodiversity. Like
Mm-hmm.
what you want to do is, if you have an autistic person in the workplace, you want to provide them with the right tools to succeed. What you don't want to do is point them out and say, because this person is autistic,
Right.
so on and so on and so on. That
Right. Right. Right.
while
Right.
that could be helpful for them, it kind of alienates them from their peers and is kind of like picking on them a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
What
Mm-hmm.
in the workplace, in life, and in your world, what you really want to do is to find a happy medium where you provide them with the tools to be successful, you provide them with the changes to the environment without fundamentally shining a spotlight on them, without
Mm-hmm.
making them seem as though they are kind of alone in all of this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
An easy example for this is if someone has ADHD, they may benefit from meeting agendas or having a meeting note taker or from
Mm-hmm.
having meetings
Mm-hmm.
recorded. Now,
Mm-hmm.
all of those things benefit everybody. I don't think a
Mm-hmm.
neurotypical person would complain if a meeting was recorded or if there was a notes from it or an agenda. So, while the purpose of any one of those three things is to benefit a neurodivergent person, ultimately it can be characterized in a way that benefits everybody
Mm-hmm.
and not specifically one neurodivergent person to whom it would have the most benefit. It still
Right.
benefits everybody, even if it
Right.
is benefiting one person disproportionately. That doesn't
Mm-hmm.
ever have to be said, except maybe between a manager and a direct report, and that's it. But you don't necessarily need to say, oh, we're having an agenda because such and such person asked for it. That's a great way to alienate them, and you don't want that. It can
Yeah.
just be like, hey, as a manager, I'm going to ask that this meeting and others now have an agenda on it. That way, we know walking into it that this is a good use of our time, and we kind of know that we can prepare for it going into the meeting.
Right. Right. No, that's what you just mentioned, again, just drawing parallels and thinking about, for me, the intersectionality. um it just reminded me about, like, in the last year or two, some jobs have been giving people, celebrating Juneteenth, I'll say, right? And one of the things that Black folks have talked about is like, well, if they don't give you the day off and you take the day off, or they tell you specifically, hey, Sheldon, if you want to take Juneteenth off, right, go right ahead, right? If you do it in a way that is much more on a like targeted kind of level, it has, whatever, some benefit, but it can also, like you said, shine the spotlight that then makes it kind of an awkward thing. Because now it's like, okay, all the Black people out of the office today, like, what's going on, right? A lot of people going to be wondering. But if instead you say everyone gets off for Juneteenth, right now, it's something where, you can have a different conversation around it. And there's no one that's kind of singled out as everybody gets off, right? And so,
Yep.
as you're talking about, those different kinds of things, I think that's exactly the best way of doing it when you're talking about different accommodations, um, for folks, is not being like, well, oh, well, hold on, Sheldon's in this meeting. We got to make sure we dim the lights. Like, and it's like, oh, shoot, like, yeah, that helps me. But then now everybody's kind of like looking at me like the low light dude, right? Like that's a whole
Yep.
different experience. Um, so to kind of start um, rounding things out is, what are some interesting advancements that you've seen in accessibility and accommodations for neurodivergent and disability needs?
You're talking about advancements or like specific examples, or what specifically are you asking about?
Yeah, like so what I mean is maybe if you've seen, a particular policy that a company has enacted, or if there are, as a CTO, right? Like, are there software um, elements that have come into play that have, made things a lot easier for folks? I mean, anything that you would say, whatever, 5 years ago, I hadn't heard of this, or it was less prevalent, but like now I've seen some people do some really cool stuff along the lines of, you know, I mean, even if it was I guess now everybody, not everybody, but many more people have like work from home ability, which definitely helps um, a lot of folks with, maybe uh, mobility needs, or who have, um, just social anxiety, needs, or whatever, so just like anything that you may have come across that you thought was particularly interesting that an employer um, has done, or that was requested by an employee that was then made policy, if that makes sense.
Something that I picked up when I was at HubSpot, which I love for every employee, whether they're neurotypical or neurodivergent or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
is the idea of what's called a working with me document. It is kind of a
Mm.
description of an individual and how they operate in the workplace, whether they're neurodivergent, neurotypical, whoever they are. It allows them to say, "Hello world, I am Shea Belsky, and this is what you want to know about me working for HubSpot on the social team." And
Mm-hmm.
it
Mm-hmm.
talks about me being autistic, my working schedule. I wear headphones. Please don't touch me. Let's get in touch with me.
Mm-hmm.
If you kind of have a meeting with me, please have like a meeting notes or an agenda document. Just kind of
Mm-hmm.
describing how I operate in the workplace. And
Mm-hmm.
that kind of a
Mm-hmm.
framework can be really beneficial for everybody, whether you're neurotypical or not, or whether
Mm-hmm.
neurodivergent or not. Let's just say that you are a parent with two kids. You can say in your working with me document, hey, at 3:45, I go to the bus stop and I pick up my kids, I hang out with them for a half hour, and then I hop back on afterwards. So if I'm
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
unavailable between 3:30 and 4:30, now you know why. Or it
Right.
could be I'm recovering from an illness or an injury or a surgery. um, I might work weird hours because I'm training for a marathon.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever it is, the idea behind this, going back to an earlier point, is that it's not an accommodation, it is an adjustment to the workplace that affects everybody. It allows everybody to have a better time, and certain individuals can benefit from it more than others. But ultimately, everybody has a chance to benefit from it, and no person will be hurt or otherwise disadvantaged by the existence of it. And I love, love, love the idea of allowing people the chance to advocate for themselves,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's a kind of disability or just something that's happening in their life, or even if it doesn't really apply to them, chance to share a little bit about them with the team, like a little slice of life of their lives for the rest of the team. And you don't
Mm-hmm.
have to get so invasive or so descriptive, but it's nice to know, like, oh, here's my dog, here's
Mm-hmm.
my kids, here's like a cool fish that I caught recently, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm. Right. Right.
It gives you a chance to just kind of be a human and just show the world, show your team, this is who I am.
Yeah. No, I like that as well because, one, it's everybody doing it, right? It's not like, you know, any particular group or whatever, but as well, you said a key word, or, a word that I, like to reference a lot, which is humanizing, right? Like it makes us human. And I think that goes back to what we were talking about earlier about, yeah, I am, neurodivergent, but I'm just, I'm human as well. Like I fish, or I play video games, or I, like to go to, the baseball games or whatever, right? Like I'm I'm a human being. And so yeah, you may see some things in there about, you know, my, use of headphones, and don't take that as me. I'm literally speaking about myself. Sometimes people have thought that my headphones was a way to like cut myself off from the world, and it's really about me and my what I this is actually one of the things I realized after I kind of self-identified, was that it was really about me, um my auditory sensory, issues, like noises and different stuff. Like, it lets me kind of stay focused. And so you can hear that part about me, but also say, oh, again, Sheldon, he was born in Philly and he likes a good cheesesteak, right? Like, okay, like that's a really good thing. So um yeah, so you know second to last question, what are like 2 or 3 things that you wish that the world knew or built more capacity for, particularly, I mean, just in general, but particularly for, neurodivergent people?
My number one thing is always just taking the time to listen to neurodivergent people, whoever they are, and just tailor your worldview of them based on what they tell you, rather than assuming that every single dyslexic or epileptic or autistic person behaves in exactly the same way from one person to the other. I think it's
Mm-hmm.
very easy to assume that two autistic people will behave or act or say the same things, but that couldn't be further from the truth. So if I could tell the world anything, it's just look at the world from multiple different perspectives and just
Mm-hmm.
see, like, this is what this person's telling you. This applies to them, but it might not apply to this other person. And
Mm-hmm.
the other thing that I would also say about being receptive and listening to neurodivergent people is, like, be willing to give them a chance. Something that I believe in very strongly is, like, having room to fail or being allowed to fail in a
Mm-hmm.
workplace, in a social environment. Just because you don't know if someone's going to do something doesn't mean you shouldn't give them the chance. In my workplace, in my previous employers, the only reason that I became a leader was because people had faith in me to try, to
Mm-hmm.
put myself out there and to give it a shot. And sometimes I would be successful and sometimes I wouldn't. But across all those experiences, I had the faith of a team behind me to be allowed to attempt something, even if I didn't know if it would work. And ultimately, I would just say, I'll give people the space they need to just give it a try and see what happens. Because if as long as they have the space to fail, it's worth a look. It's worth trying.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good one as well, because again, one of the things that I think in the world we have too little of is grace, and um, a how do I want to say, we don't put as much value on the learning process, right? Like, we create scenarios, wittingly and otherwise, where we create this pressure around like getting it right the first time. And
Yep.
um, that, again, for everybody, can create tensions, but particularly for folks who are trying to navigate things in a way, in a world that isn't set up to, it's kind of like the whatever, right? It's like, if you ask a fish to climb a tree, right, like, as opposed to a lemur or something, right, like,
Yep.
it's going to be challenging for them, right? And so um yeah, I think that that's, like I said, a really, really, really good point, for folks. So um last thing is, tell us, do you have any projects? Are you all working on anything interesting, um with the company that, you wanted to mention? Like I said, anything that you think folks should know about you kind of going forward?
Mentra, obviously, if you are a job seeker looking for jobs in software, data, or design, sign up for us, Mentra.com, and you will be able to sign up. It takes 20 minutes as a job seeker. Um, we're also piloting some kind of cool new stuff with generative AI, with a little bit of GPT as a virtual job coach. I'm really excited about that one personally, because whether or not you're looking for a job, it can be cool to run something by a ChatGPT kind of bot to understand how to work with a recruiter, how to write a cover letter, how to get help with your resume. And I'll also add that none of your data ever leaves ChatGPT. It only stays there. We'll never sell your data. We're never giving it to anybody. All your data stays with us and ChatGPT, so don't worry about any of that stuff. I think that's
Yeah.
kind of the coolest new thing that we're doing, and I think it has the most potential in the future to, as we said, reduce the barrier to entry for people who need that kind of support and they can need all the help they can get.
Yeah, that does sound interesting, and I'm glad that you spoke to the privacy thing. As you may remember, my actual primary, job, as it were, my business is around tech consulting, particularly with a focus on making sure things are more inclusive and equitable. And this AI revolution, one of the biggest things I'm making sure that folks are aware of is around privacy and understanding how their data is used. Like, there's no putting the genie back in the bottle, but being mindful about, how we're using, and that to me is like super, super critical. So, that does sound exciting. I know me, I've always just been really terrible with like writing resumes and, quote unquote, selling myself. So anything that could help me in that regard, definitely sounds cool. So, yeah. Anything else you want to share? I mean,
if you want to stay in touch with me, you can find me on the social media platform of your choice. I'm on Instagram. I'm on LinkedIn. I dabble in TikTok a little bit. I'm Shea Belsky, SHEA, B as in boy, ELSKY. There's only one of me. If you find me, you'll find me. If you find somebody else with the same name, let me know and I'll take care of it.
Right. Brilliant. Well, Shea, thank you so much for joining me. I, as always, enjoy our conversation. Like I said, thank you for making time and for sharing insights into this. I know there are a lot of folks who are, looking for these kinds of supports. And so hopefully folks find, more folks find you and find the jobs that, make them feel like they want to stay, kind of going back to what you said earlier. So thanks again, man.
Absolutely. Thank you so much again for having me. And I look forward to catching up with everything else soon. I so appreciate getting a chance to talk with you.
Yep. No problem, man. All right. Thank you for joining me for another episode of I Must Be BUGN. I hope you've learned something, became curious, and most importantly, felt affirmed by what you heard. Remember, this podcast is all about sharing compassionate narratives about who we are and how we contribute to the beautiful and necessary diversity of humanity. This is our place to unmask and just be. Don't forget to connect with me on IG at I Must Be BUGN, where I'm eager to see you share your thoughts, your experiences, and your stories. And if you've enjoyed today's episode, please share it with a friend, leave a review, and subscribe. It helps others who are eager for community find our people. So thank you again for being a part of the I Must Be BUGN community. I can't wait for the next episode. Until then, stay up and enjoy who you were meant to be. And remember, you're not bugging, you're brilliant.